Well, this is a wee piece of sculpture I made called, well, I call The Secret River Within the Stone, and there's a story behind that. And it's quite interesting because it tells you something about me, something about where an artist's inspiration comes from. About 4 years ago, we took, my wife and I took our daughter and our two then grandchildren for a picnic in a lovely, beautiful, sunny fishing spot. And I went with my 4-year-old grandson into the river to fish. I knew we weren't going to catch anything. It wasn't the point. The point was to have a kind of granddad-grandson moment where we stood in a river together and dangled a line in the water and thought we might catch a fish. The sun was out, it was wonderful. As we were standing there, out the corner of my eye, I saw something kind of glistening in the water. It was a stone underwater just off to my right that looked as if it shouldn't be there. It was unlike others. It was a pure kind of Lord of the Rings moment, to be honest. And I bent down and I picked it up, and it's about the size of a grapefruit, and I put it into my pocket and never thought anything else about it. Picnic over, back home, children away back to Glasgow, and the next day I thought, that was quite a nice stone. I picked it out of the pocket and I looked at it and I thought, I'll cut it in half and just see what's inside, because it was a kind of beckoning that was happening. And I thought, if it's nice, I'll polish it up. And that was the end of the story. So I did that, cut it in half, and I polished it up, and it polished up absolutely beautifully. It was a wonderful face of the stone, and I put it in the fireplace. And over the next sort of 6 months, I wasn't consciously looking at it, but we would sit down of an evening and I was aware of it out the corner of my eye as it had been in the river. The stone was sitting there all polished, and I thought, after about a month or a year, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I incised the river onto the stone, the river that we stood in together, and that when Otto, my grandson, was 17 or 18, I would give it to him, and I would say, this is a precious memory from Grandad, and this is the river we stood in, and this is the stone. So I did that. I took it to the studio and I carved this little river. I described the river, and it sat back in the fireplace for another year. And then one day I was looking at it and I thought, gosh, that would be really nice, carved up bigger. So that's what I did here. I found a stone and I carved this piece up. So I cut this stone in half just as I had done with the original, and I carved this and I carved the river much as I'd done in the small hand-sized piece. And I sat it in the studio and I thought that was the end of the story. The other half of the stone I discarded into the spoil heap at the side of the studio, and every day, this is partly how I live my life, I walk in and out to the studio and I pass the spoil heap and I cock an eye to the right, and then there was something about the piece that had been cut off that was beckoning in the same way that shining stone under the water had right back in the beginning. And I took it into the studio and I realised that there was some part of the story still there, and effectively the part of the story that was still there was to carve the same river in the other half of the stone, but this time in relief and not in incision. So it's difficult to see with the lighting, but so instead of carving it down into the stone, I carved it up so that the same design exists in both half of the stone. So the same river exists with the same DNA in both sides of the stone, and it exists as something that belongs together, could be put back together notionally, of course, could be put back together, and that then becomes the secret river within the stone.